Okay, we're going to do a quick update here on what we've done since the last video. Obviously we made the chain, just cut a few links out of it and put it together. Main big thing we're getting ready to do now is mount the fender. A couple things I like to do to get ready to do that process, helps a lot, is what I do is clamp a ruler across here. What that does is when we set the fender on there, it gives us a little ledge to set the fender on. The other thing is these hoses are about, I figured out about how much standoff I want between the tire and the fender, and that's how I came up with the hose size to use. These are just taped on here to stand off the fender, basically give me roughly the space I want until I'm ready to actually weld some slugs onto the frame and mount it. One safety thing, you're going to want to consult the tire manufacturer specs and find out how much tire growth you have, at what speed, because that's a safety factor. I know some of the older tires really grew a lot at higher speeds. These more modern Avons like this hardly grow at all, but bottom line, you're going to want to know for sure how much tire growth you have, and you're going to want to have at least that much standoff between the tire and the fender. Another thing we did to get ready for the fender mounting is plasma cut a chain cutout. This is just a relief so that this fender is quite a bit wider than this tire, and it's just a relief so that the chain can go by it without rubbing on the fender. I plasma cut that, and then Big T cleaned it up, made it look really nice. Okay, just mocked up the fender struts we're going to use, and basically here's how the fender mops up. We'll just rotate it around until it sits on that little ledge like I talked about. You can see how the chain cutout works. And then something else that's real handy, Big T, if you want to swing around here, do some lines at this elevation and this elevation. That will show us, when we take this off here, it'll show us, we'll drill, we'll center it this direction and between those two lines, and that'll show us exactly where to drill for the bolt that's going to go into a slug right here. The other thing we do that line will help us figure out is we like to use reinforcing straps. We just take a strip of this exact same fender material, radius the exact same way, and just weld it wherever we're going to have an attachment point. It's amazing how much just adding a 2-inch strip of steel in a few places just makes these fenders incredibly much stronger. It also reinforces that point where there's going to be a ton of flexion and stress and vibration where that fastener goes on. Basically it reinforces that area. That's the main place where the fender's going to try to break over time. So we use those lines to, this is going to go on the inside, of course, but those lines will show us right where to put our reinforcing strap on the inside, and it'll also show us where to drill that hole. Okay, another update on how we're doing on our 200 tire Hardtail Ironhead Sportster. The sprocket cover had to be spacered outward. If you remember, we're using a 1-inch offset spacer, and just a quick dirty way to get our cover back on and still not have a problem with this colliding with the sprocket and the chain. We just took some 1-inch spacers, just some generic spacers off the shelf, and put them between the cover and the cases. We've got 3 of them. 1, 2, 3 of those. What that does is just stands the cover up off the sprocket. There's other ways of doing this probably. You can even be as elaborate as making another cover. But that's just a quick, simple, easy way of doing that. Then I just mocked up the master cylinder, rear brake master cylinder. I just mocked up the stock one. That'll go there like that with a clamp. I just wanted to mock that up and see how if we're going to have to fabricate or do anything as far as a rod to get us from here to here, and it looks like it lines up fairly straight, so that's not going to be a problem. Okay, well, as you can see, we went ahead and mounted the seat. There's not a whole lot to say about that. It's just a matter of getting everything square. I had a center mark for this member anyway, so I just went ahead and measured out from that center mark in each direction just to make sure that I had my weld-on stanchions in the same position so they'll look nice. And then same deal here, these tabs I just measured from the edge of the backbone outward to make sure those were centered real nice. Once you get that centered and level, that's just a matter of tapping that in place. Went ahead with the fender mounting. Since last video, when we had it mocked up on there, we drilled the fender so that it would bolt to this little slug here. And you can see my marks. Just to make sure that the fender was centered really well on the frame, I just put some marks for each side of that slug. That was the first step to get the fender hanging on there. Then we worked our way down. I just took one of our fender mounting tabs off the shelf and bolted it on so I have a place to grab it. We had pre-drilled that hole previously. And then just ran a piece of strap steel centered on the frame back to it. The bottom that's hanging off here, once everything's final welded, that'll just get cut off and that'll go in the dumpster. So that holds that in place. That will also become a handy spot for our battery tray mounts to attach on this side. So in subsequent videos you'll see us use that as a mount point for the bottom of the battery tray. Okay, then you can also see that we did some work on our struts. They ended up being a little high. I didn't like where they were touching the fender. They were going to be way up here, and the slugs would have been a kind of a pain in the butt to cope those slugs to this rounded part. So we just cut them, slugged them, and took about a ½ inch out of each of them to move them down. Then Big T made me some 4 slugs to bolt to. So we just bolted those with some little button heads to the flanges of the fender struts, clamped those on and tacked those on, and now you can see we've got a fender that, even though it's only tacked in a few spots, it's rock solid. It's moving the whole bike and the whole lift before it's flexing. So that turned out real nice. Okay, so we're going to talk about making a battery tray mount. If you remember from the first video, our battery tray mount kit, I'm going to review that with you real quick to kind of explain what the components are and how we use these to make a battery tray mount, a rubber mounted battery tray mount. If you use a purely AGM or absorbed glass matte battery, a battery that's basically a solid core or has a gel mass to it, you might be able to get away without mounting it rubber. I always mount batteries rubber for customers, partly because I'm old school and partly just to give the guy the option of using the old-fashioned lead acid battery. I recommend going to an AGM when you go to a rigid, just for no other reason. The pounding that a rigid gives a battery, I think they last quite a bit longer. Anyway, back to the battery tray mount kit. It comes with 4 rubber ISOs threaded 1/4 on each end. It comes with 4 washers. All these are is standoffs because the threads don't go quite down to the rubber ISO, so they're just standoffs, so you can thread it tight. 4 of these little tabs. They're handy. This part here is the idea is that it'll thread into the battery tray. The tab is just so you have a place to grab it on the other end, and this can be welded to the frame or wherever you want to weld it, and then a nylock nut to resist twisting off. Okay, you can see how we sort of took those basic raw materials and made a platform for the battery base. Some of the tabs I had Big T just radius, so that if they're sticking out the edge, I didn't want them to you know, be a sharp corner or whatever, plus just to make them look a little more nice. And you can see how some of them were threaded into the battery trays, come pre-threaded that we make. Some of them we just thread right into the battery tray, and probably when it's done we'll put a nut on top to lock that in. You got your standoff washer, your rubber ISO, and then on the bottom you can see where we use that tab. Big T, if you want to get a view from the back there, you can see how we use that. Okay, coming around to the other side, I like to 4-point these. I like to have them at 4 points. On the other side, you can see how we use the, remember we said we were going to use that Fender strap that came from the frame as a mount point, or a place to tie into for the battery mount. Okay, so now we've got the battery in place on the platform we made for it. And pretty much the last thing to show you is just how the strap holds it in. What really makes the battery stay in place is the tabs at the front and the rear and the slugs on the side. The strap really just forces it down in between those so that it's got nowhere it can go. So that basically it's stuck in there. As long as it can't get any higher, it can't get out. And the battery's mounted. Tomorrow or the next day we'll have our oil tank in-house, and we'll mount the oil tank. Maybe talk about oil line routing a little bit, but we're just about to wind up fabrication on this little project. Customers just having us do from the seat post back on the conversion, really nothing on the front end, so we're getting close to having her done. So thanks.